Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I had two thoughts for what to do today, and what I decided to do was a very interesting passage from the Torah reading of Noah, which is coming up on Saturday in the Jewish community. Noah is the Hebrew for Noah, a very important prophet and figure in world history, according to both Jewish Christian, or I should say Jewish Christian and Muslim narratives. And the Torah reading of Noah includes a lot of interesting things. Of course, it begins with Noah, the righteous man in his generation, and there's a lot of debate as to what that means, and the command to build a Hebrew is teva, usually translated as an ark, and floating on the water for a period of time, which comes out to be about a year. And then he has the incident with the birds and finding that there's dry land. He comes to rest on Mount Ararat. We typically today think about Mount Ararat as being a place that is located on the border of Turkey and Armenia, not too far from Iran. And one of the highest points in the whole neighborhood. It's over 17,000 feet. Islamic tradition typically puts this as a place that's near the border of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, near the high mountain overlooking the Euphrates River. After Noah comes out from the ark, he gets a covenant from God. It includes the rainbow. And God tells him, according to the biblical text, all sorts of things. In Jewish tradition, this is the source for a note which is called the 7 principles or the 7 commandments for all Noahites, all the descendants of Noah. And that's what we're going to look at today. So here is my study sheet. Can you guys all see this? Good. So this is the passage from Genesis chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then your fear and your dread shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the fowl of heaven, the birds of the heaven, and everything that creeps on the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea, for they have been given into your hands." Text is actually pretty similar in some ways to God's charge to the first man. And in many ways, Noah is a kind of second man. Nation starts anew, you might say, and some of these things are repeated. I'm going to go over the verses first, and then we'll look at the Rashi commentary and some of the other things which I have collected. Verse 3, what does verse 3 say? Anybody want to join in and tell me what verse 3 says?
I can read that, Dr. Ward, if you'd like.
The end of vegetarianism.
Okay, Jacob is going to read it, and then Mimi is going to comment.
So,
Jacob.
Every moving thing that lives shall be yours to eat. Like the green vegetation, I have given you everything. So,
Mimi, what does this mean?
Well, that they can now eat animals, and the lifespan drops from around 900 years to 100 years.
Well, so yeah, every moving thing that lives shall be yours to eat, like green vegetation. In other words, Adam. And there's a passage from the Talmud called Sanhedrin on page 59b. We're not going to read that one, but we'll read a few more from the Talmud in that discussion. And Rashi reminds us that according to the Talmud, Adam, the first man, and he was called La Adam Harishon, the first man, to eat meat, but only vegetation. But Natati Lachem, I've given you, Noah, and your family, everything. On verse 4, there's a limitation. What's the limitation? Anybody want to read that for us? Jacob, you're doing a good job. Read verse 4.
But flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat.
Right. And I'll just point out for the Hebrew, it says ach, which here they translate but. Basar benafsho, damo lo tochelu. our friend Cantor Neal is interested in the trup, the little markings. And I don't know if any of you really know Hebrew well enough except Simcha, but you'll notice Binafsho Damo Lo Tochelu, which is interesting because it's flesh with its soul. Ach Basar, the break comes here, but flesh. Binafsho Damo, with its soul in its blood, you shall not eat. Something like that. Binafsho Damo literally means its blood. Dam is blood. Shouldn't surprise Zainab. And nafsh,
I wanted to mention, damn,
nafsh for soul, that shouldn't surprise you either. Nefesh in Hebrew, nafs in Arabic. So it's binafsihi damuhu, which is a very strange way of saying it, but that's the language. Okay, so without thinking about what Rashi says, what do you think this means? But meat or flesh, its blood being in its soul, you shall not eat. So what do you think that means?
Is it kind of referring to basically if you're eating an animal, the animal itself should be dead, not...
Yeah, that's exactly what Rashi says. He prohibited them to eat a limb cut off from a living creature, as long as the animal has blood in it, which we assume means living, although if we were to get into all the details, how much blood does there have to be in it? But we assume that it means that the animal has to be dead, has to be slaughtered has to be dead in order to eat a part of it. So if you have for example, a lamb, and you want to cut off a leg of lamb while the lamb is still alive, you can't eat that. That's what this is typically understood. And this comes again from Sanhedrin. And our editor said, even if the animal dies after you cut off the limb, you still can't eat the limb. Okay? This is an example of a Rashi that makes an awful lot of sense, although it's not necessarily obvious. How about line 5? What does verse 5 say? Jacob, you've been our reader. Why don't you read for us again?
But your blood of your souls I will demand an account. From the hand of every beast I will demand it. And from the hand of man, from the hand of each man, his brother, I will demand the soul of man.
Okay, so what do you think this means?
Is this would this be considered like talking about sacrifice?
Well, it's not clear what it means based on only the Bible. The Jewish tradition has a pretty good idea of what it means, but your blood for your souls I will demand from the hand of every beast, from the hand of man, from the hand of each man, his brother, I demand the soul of man. Reading it again, it sounds very repetitive, but it looks like if murder is prohibited, murder even by animal might be prohibited. And there's something about fratricide, hand of each man his brother, and so on. I don't know what this meant to our ancient ancestors. It's not impossible that biblical scholars would say, well, the language is very similar in Egypt or Mesopotamia. On the other hand, Jewish tradition asserts that there is a living tradition that understands the meaning, and Rashi has only some of the meanings. I'm allowing, says God, you to take the life of animals, but you can't take your own life. Rashi picks out the idea of suicide, and that comes from Genesis Rabbah. Then he says, there is no blood when you strangle yourself. Presumably, if you hang someone, there's no blood. And even when there is no blood that emits, it's still considered to be prohibited. Suicide is hardly the only thing that is mentioned to understand this verse. From the hand of every beast. What is Rashi saying over there? Okay, well, yes.
Is it the idea of like if an animal were to kill a human, then the animal would then have to atone for it or pay for it?
Yeah, or something. Whatever it is, Noah is told that God will demand justice even from beasts who kill other people. Okay? And our editor does not know the source, and neither do I. From the hand of man, remember the idea here is that every word is important, and there are heaps and heaps of interpretations on every word. So from the hand of one who kills intentionally without witnesses, I will demand his life. And we'll look at the Targum. So from the hand of man is added there. You wouldn't need this, but it says, even if there are no witnesses, rest assured that God will demand justice from somebody who kills intentionally, even if there is no witness. Now, the rabbis are going to ask how many witnesses are in fact needed. Does anybody know what the Bible says in general for witnesses?
Is it 3?
2 or 3. Simcha put up a finger with 2, but in point of fact, it sometimes says 2 or 3. But we'll see, the rabbis have a different idea for Noahites. And then from the hand of each man his brother, a person who, they understand unintentional killing. And here you have the idea of exile. For Jews, there is the idea that there were cities of exile. They were internal exile. We generally call them cities of refuge. If you killed somebody unintentionally, you went to a prison town. There were 6 of them set up, and you were basically imprisoned there until the death of the high priest. And you can read what he has to say.
Is this also, would you say, like kind of in response to the story of Cain and Abel, talking about?
It could be, but it's not presented that way. In other words, I looked at a number of sources. I didn't spend an awful lot of time, but I didn't see any that linked this particular verse directly to Cain and Abel. Okay, on the other hand, that was a death in which there were no witnesses, but only God. So you could say that the Cain and Abel story, where God seeks justice from Cain and gives Cain a way to seek atonement, provides a model for this statement. That's fine. Verse 6 is a very important verse. We'll see lots and lots of stuff about it. Whoever sheds the blood of man, through man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God, he made man. In my mysticism class, we talked about this, et ha'adam. It was a different verse about man being expelled from the garden or divorced from the garden. But this is a very interesting thing in the Zohar, where et represents the Shekhinah, at least according to the text we looked at. Okay, through man shall his blood be shed. If there are witnesses, you kill him. Why? Because man was made in the image of God. This is an elliptical verse. That means it says, Ki b'tzelem Elohim asa Elohim et ha'adam. And Rashi's just telling us something about the grammar. And then this section ends, be fruitful and multiply and swarm upon the earth and multiply thereon. Again, this is a parallel text to Genesis 1 and to a certain extent Genesis 2. Okay? Interestingly enough, and we'll look at Yevamot in a moment, anybody who does not engage in propagation to one is compared to somebody who sheds blood. So if you don't have any kids, it's like you're murdering the descendants that you might have had. So there you go. Here's the Targum. Flesh which is torn of the living beast, what time the life is in it. or that torn from a slaughtered animal before all the breath has gone forth, you shall not eat. Notice the Targum adds a little bit more than what was in the actual verse. But the blood of your lives, dimchon lenafshat techon, the blood of your lives I will require of every animal which has killed a man. I will require that it be put to death on his account. So the Targum is in Aramaic, a series of mostly Aramaic translations. I use Safaria for these texts. Safaria has Targum of Rabbi Sadia Gaon. Sadia lived in Baghdad, or he died in Baghdad in 942. He was born in Egypt and he lived in southern Iraq for a while before that, but he moved to Baghdad the last decades of his life. And Sadia wrote a Targum in Arabic, in Hebrew characters, but I didn't find anything that was particularly interesting this week. Safaria has the Targum Jonathan, the so-called Targum Jonathan, and I put the PS, pseudo Jonathan, often has elaborations of the text that try to explain it. Sometimes they clearly reflect rabbinic ideas. Sometimes they reflect ideas from the Midrash. Sometimes they're ideas unique to Targum Jonathan. Actually, I mentioned this for Zainab. I suspect that some of the Shia ideas about the sons of Ali being similar to the sons of Harun, of Aaron, are mirrored vaguely in the Targum Jonathan. It's an old, I think, Persian word, shapur, and shapur in Aramaic is good, and shapir in Aramaic. And some of the Shiite sources I looked at ages and ages ago connected shapur with Hassan and Hussein, because shapur means good and Hassan and Hussein mean good. And so the Shabir and, is it Shabur? I know there are a lot of Shias who are called words like Shabir and words that are based on that root.
Shubayr, we have Shubayr.
Shubayr and
Yeah.
Shabir.
Yeah, but the point is that Shapur in Persian means the son of king. Shah means king.
Oh, Shabur. So in Aramaic, Shapir means good. So as I said, the Targum and some of the Shia sources that I looked at connected Hassan with Shubayr, Hussein rather with Shubayr, which I found was interesting, and I've never been able to really follow it up progressively. But I digress. Targum Jonathan is fascinating source. In any case, so here he gives the legal ramifications. I require it to be put to death on his account, the hand of the human being from the hand of the man who shed the blood of his brother. I will require the life of man. So here the blood of his brother simply is human beings shedding each other, killing each other. And here he adds the words, whoever sheds the blood of man, the judges by witnesses shall condemn him to death. If the answering machine answers, I'm going to turn off the sound for a moment. Just hold on for a second.
No one is able to take your call right now, so please leave your name, phone number, and a brief message after the
Okay, sorry about that, but this is a COVID virus thing. I found that it's not practical for me to relocate the voice answering machine. So here, the notion which is found in the Jewish sources that this has to do with judges and witnesses condemning it to death. So if the person has witnesses, judges shall condemn him to death. If a person has no witnesses, the Lord of the world will bring punishment upon him. It may be on the day of the great judgment. And that's because the image of the Lord, God made man, and therefore people who commit murder, even if they are not brought to justice by human justice, still pay the penalty. I copied a couple of interesting sources. I hope you will find them interesting as well. This is the Talmud Baba Kama. Bob means
Father?
no. Bob means gate,
Oh.
Yeah.
and Kama actually is from Kavma, which means first. So this is the first gate, and there are three of them: this middle and the end gate. The Gemara asks, Mantana disham etle de amar ein adam rashai lechabel biatzmo. Which Tana here means an early sage said it is not permitted for a person to injure himself, and the Hebrew word is lechabel, to injure himself. And then he says, maybe it's this one Tana who taught one of our verses, edrosh. Surely the blood of your souls I will require. Rabbi Elazar says, from the hand of your souls I require your soul. That means if you take your own life. But the Gemara says that's might be different. Killing may be different. Injuring oneself might be something else. And I'm not going to get into this at all, just to say that one of the meanings that's sometimes ascribed to this verse is what we saw in Rashi, that suicide is not allowed. I found it was interesting, the discussion of the laws of Noahites, the children of Noah. One of the passages right before the main body talks about the prohibition of castration. Be fruitful and multiply, swarm in the earth and multiply in it. Nothing may be done to prevent reproduction. I have no idea whether this is related to harming oneself or not. They're different verses. The other Tanaim, the other early scholars, hold that this verse is written as a blessing. It is not a commandment of the Noahites to be fruitful and multiply. It is a commandment for Jews according to Jewish understanding, but it is a blessing for non-Jews, for all Noahites to do that. And now the main part, we'll read through this as quickly as possible. I have some summaries at the end, and we're not going to do everything in the Talmud. The Talmud in Sanhedrin, I think this is already page 59b. Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Acha, found that it was written in a book of Agadot in the study hall of Rav, a descendant of Noah is executed on the basis of one judge and even one witness, without forewarning, by the mouth of a man, not by the mouth of a woman. Even a relative may testify. I'm going to hold off on the last part of this, which is actually quite important in one contemporary issue. So Rabbi Yaakov looked at our verse, and he said the wording tells us it can be one person because it's ha'adam, the man. And that can be a judge. It can even be a single witness. Jewish tradition has this notion that you need to be warned. Simcha, for example, you can tell us, if you were going to be killed by a Sanhedrin, executed by Sanhedrin for murder, if you want to get out of being executed by a Sanhedrin for murder, do you know how that would happen?
I get out of that?
Yeah, how to beat the verdict. You may not know where I'm going with this, but you probably know the answer. According to the way the rabbis understood this, they made it very difficult for a religious court to render a capital punishment. If you were going to convict somebody of murder, you had to have two witnesses see the murder. The witnesses had to tell the perpetrator, by the way, you know that this is contrary to Bible law, and that the court can put you to death. And you have to say, I know, but still I'm going to kill this guy. And if one of those pieces are not there, you can get punished, but the court cannot impose the biblical penalty of death. Simcha, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to get at when I asked you that.
It's very, I mean, I don't even know. It's hard to even find a case where the Sanhedrin actually sentenced somebody to death. They talk about it a lot, but it's hard to find, I think, an actual case. You know, that because they would err on the other side of not wanting to do it. You know,
Yeah,
so,
I'm a little bit more liberal than Simcha is. I think that they really did not want to put people to death.
Yeah.
And the Bible required it. So they made lots of fences, as it were, around the requirement. They found ways to make it very, very difficult so that it would have to be a unique situation in order to impose a death penalty.
Yeah.
So the rabbis would say that they shouldn't be, if they imposed a penalty, every 10 years, that would already be a murderous court because it was so difficult to meet all the requirements. And at a certain point, when violence was rising in the land of Israel, according to the way the rabbis tell the story, the Sanhedrin moved out of the temple so that they could not impose the death penalty because they were worried that some case might meet all of the expectations for imposing the death penalty. Historically speaking, the Romans were in charge and they did not like the Sanhedrin putting people to death. They thought that would be the imperative of the Roman governors. So I suspect that the Sanhedrin may have moved out for that reason as well. Nevertheless, you see over here that you need for Noahites to have one witness or one judge, as opposed to the Bible, who says 2 witnesses and 3 judges. And even at the hand of a brother, that means you could have a witness who was a relative. In Jewish law, you can't have a relative give testimony or be a judge. Okay, let's go on a little bit. Here we go. The last line says, what is a person that is in a person? You must say, this is a fetus that is in its mother's womb. So this particular rabbi understands that Rabbi Ishmael says, the book of Agadot says that the sages said, in the name of Rabbi Ishmael. That's the chain of authorities, as it were. That a descendant of Noah is executed for killing a fetus. Rabbi Ishmael's reason comes from our verse because it says, Shofech dam adam be'adam, a person who sheds the blood of a person. Ba can mean by means of, but also can mean in. When I teach grammar, I call these things instrument versus interior or something like that. So, ani ochel b'mazleg, I'm eating with a fork. Ba'adam can also mean babayit, in the house. And so Rabbi Ishmael presumably learns a person inside a person is this, and a fetus is in its mother's womb, and that is prohibited. A person is liable for killing a fetus. Now, this is portrayed as being a law unique to the descendants of Noah. It comes up in modern Jewish discussions about when abortion is and is not allowed and whether it is murder or not. The presumption from this passage is that it's shfichut damim, the shedding of blood, which is one of the cardinal sins. It's not clear that all sources look at it that way. One of the reasons for that is that the Gemara goes on and says that the first Tana doesn't derive the halacha, the Jewish law, the same way. And again, a person's blood shed while it's in the person's body means strangulation. And this particular authority learned that the descendants of Noah are executed by the court by strangulation. Now, all of this really was an exercise, you might say a thought exercise. When the rabbis were developing this law, there was really no way that Jewish authority, rabbinic authority, would extend to Noahide courts. but it is an authority about what basic principles are common to all human beings. And the idea that there should be execution, and there is a discussion, should it be by sword or should it be by hanging? Presumably strangulation is hanging, although that is not how the rabbis understood strangulation for Israelites. I didn't find a found translation of Midrash Rabbah, but Rashi referred to Midrash Rabbah. This is Genesis Rabbah. And I'm just going to go very quickly through these things. I had time to think about what they were, but I didn't put the English prompts for this. So the first thing says, Rabbi Yossi Bar Aibu says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the first man was not warned about Avram and Achai, about a limb, tearing a limb from an animal. And that's because he was a vegetarian. Noah was. The second point was, Ach lahavi et achonek atzmo yachol keshaul Talmud lomar ach yachol kechananya mishal biazaria Talmud lomar ach. Breshit Rabbah says the language was put together this way to add the not only killing somebody else but strangling oneself. It says, what about falling on your sword? Or what about going into the fiery furnace? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shaul died by sword, possibly by his own hands, in that he asked his servant to help him with it. And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah went into the fiery furnace, again, dying by their own hands by fire. And stoning is left out here. But Sreifa, Chenek, Vehereg, the sword, the fire, and the strangulation are three of the four methods that were supposedly used for judicial executions. And I'm not going to go to the others, just to point out how it works. Rambam, Maimonides, wrote the Mishnah Torah. Maimonides died in 1204 in Cairo. And this is from the laws of the murder and the preservation of life. Whoever sheds human blood by human hands shall his own blood be shed. This commits a murder himself and not through an agent. I will require lifeblood, refers to suicide. I require of any beast refers to somebody who puts a man in front of a beast to devour him. Notice a very different interpretation here. Before we saw the suggestion that it was a human being, a beast who killed a man or killed another beast would be punished by God. Here, a human being who uses an animal to kill somebody else will be punished. A man who that of his fellow man, that is somebody hires a hitman, hires somebody else to kill his fellow man. And the verb require is iterated to show that the verdict is left with God in these cases because human courts are not able to judge. And I'm sorry this went backwards. And I'm going to stop. I'm going to refer to this and I'll send it to anybody who asks, but I'm going to stop with the very beginning of chapter 9 of the Mishnah Torah, the laws of kings and wars. Adam, the first man, was commanded with 6 commandments: the prohibition of idolatry, the requirement to not to do the opposite of blessing the name of God, not to curse God, and the prohibition of murder, and the prohibition of illicit sexual relations, thievery, establishing a system of justice. These are the 6 commandments of Adam. Not all of them are easy to find in God's words to Adam. The verses in the Torah, we learn that these that were commanded. 7th commandment was added to Noah, who says, even flesh, life is in the blood, don't eat of it. One of our passages. These commandments are universally applicable until Abraham. Abraham added circumcision, and Maimonides added the morning prayer. Isaac separated out a tithe and added another prayer in the afternoon. We actually don't learn tithing from Isaac. Jacob got the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, and that is still part of Jewish practice, and the evening prayer. In Egypt, Amram was commanded with other precepts. I did not do more research. I only noted the footnote in the edition in Sepharia. I don't know which those precepts are. And Moses got the entire Torah. As I said, I'm going to try to stop early so we have discussions. I'm just going to go through this quickly so you can see some of the other discussions. The stuff in italics is from the commentary that's in the Sepharia. Maimonides has the prohibition of abortion. Even the prohibition of killing somebody who has an incurable terminal illness. These days, abortion and euthanasia are very, very difficult issues. If he killed a pursuer when he could have saved his friend by injuring one of the pursuer's limbs, he's also executed. Apparently, the Jews have a little bit less if they kill somebody just in case. He might kill. The pursuer means if it's like a make my day law. In Hebrew, it's called rodef. If somebody's coming after you, kill him first. If somebody's coming after a third person and you could kill him and that would prevent him from making a murder, and you kill him, that's understandable, although you're supposed to try not to kill him. And here it's saying Noahites are supposed to try even harder. Maimonides uses the law of the rodef to have an exception for abortion. Maimonides says that in some ways a fetus could be considered to be a pursuer who's coming to kill the mother. Now, it doesn't happen all the time, but in pre-modern times, when pregnancy was a lot more dangerous than it is today, it was considered to be more likely that a fetus might very well cause the death of the mother. And the mother's life takes precedence, according to Maimonides and just about all Jewish sources, until the time of birth. There's a little bit of discussion of how much birth, whether it's the whole head or half of the body and so on. But up to the time, as long as the fetus is entirely in the body, the mother's life takes precedence over the life of the fetus, despite what Maimonides says over here. And he uses the law of the pursuer to do that. Oh, the PDF jumps back and forth.
Interesting, because it seems that in Islam they say that after 4 months, abortion is not permissible, but before 4 months, you can abort the baby because they say that there is no soul inside the fetus and stuff like that.
There are Jewish ideas also. Both Jews and Muslims talk about it being like water and having no soul and no nothing and so on. Although, as I said, there's a lot of debate these days because it's a very complicated issue.
I'm teaching them this semester. I'm teaching abortion, stuff about abortion and euthanasia. I taught them perhaps 2 weeks ago, because it's very interesting what you said about the fact that a mom's life can be in danger of some problems. Yeah, there was a philosopher who said exactly the same, that if you see that the mom's life is in danger, so abortion is permissible.
Yeah, these days this is a very tough issue. So give me an example with marriage law. In Islam, it is possible, and in secular law, I think it is possible for a woman who is married to be unmarried by the court system. In Jewish law, the only way that a marriage can come to an end is if the man issues a bill of divorce and the woman accepts the bill of divorce. It sounds more egalitarian than it is in practice, because in practice, almost all women whose husbands write bills of divorces are happy to accept them, whereas some men are not interested in divorcing the wife. So, and it's not as egalitarian as it sounds. And this has been the situation for 1,000 years. And before that, it was not the case. let's say you have a woman who's married to a man who is in a persistent vegetative state, who could be kept on life support for 50 years. Well, that woman is stuck because there's no way he can divorce her, and there is no polygamy in Judaism these days, and never was for women. So she is stuck. And there are a number of other cases in which it's very, very difficult. And the same thing, abortion is a very tough law in general in the Jewish community. As I said, nobody in the Jewish community of whom I'm aware thinks that abortion should be prohibited in all cases, up to, in all cases. The issues as to when and how long and what allows it to happen, those are complicated. Most liberal Jews and some traditional Jews are very liberal about this as well, think that not only the death of the mother, but the inability of the mother to be a mother and the inability of the mother to care for the baby and psychological damage, all those things need to be taken into account. And then there are others who are a lot less liberal about it. What do Noahites have to say regarding the laws of justice? They have to set up magistrate in each district to judge the people with regard to these 6 commandments, issue warnings. A non-Jew who violates one of the 7 commandments can be executed by means of the sword. Notice we saw before that suffocation was what was done. And then you can see some other things over there. And I'm going to end with something from Yevamot. Rabbi Asi said, the Messiah, son of David, will not come until all the souls of the body have been finished. That means until every soul that was destined to be born will be born. And he quotes a verse from Isaiah, but he also quotes the verse that we had. Whoever does not engage in be fruitful and multiply is shedding blood, because there's some sort of soul that will not get a body if you don't take care of that. And Rabbi Yaakov says in response to Rabbi Asi, it's even more than that, because in the image of God, God made man, and you'll be fruitful and multiply. So whoever sheds blood is diminishing the divine image. And so be fruitful and multiply means you have to not shed blood and also increase the divine image. Rabbi Yaakov says, and Rabbi Asi as well, says that all of our thoughts should be devoted towards the idea that we human beings are in the divine image, and everything that we should do should be to increase that in the world. And redemption, Messiah, son of David, refers to the times of final redemption and the judgment of good and evil and so on. That will be brought by emphasizing this fact. Well, that's all that I have for today. I hope there is some discussion. Some of us have left already, I see. I think Jacob said he had to leave at 5:30. I'm sorry I was so verbose. Simcha, did I bore you? You turned off your camera. Maybe I did.
Just a short question. Sorry, you said the word you pronounced was shapur or shabur, B or P?
Well, in Arabic, they don't have a P.
Yeah, it should be B, yeah.
Yeah, so the ancient Persian kings were called Shapur.
Yeah, Shapur, because Shapur means son. It was
Son of the Shah.
Yeah.
In Aramaic, Shapir means good. As I said, I found this very interesting midrash, very interesting Shia text. This goes back a long time ago, in which he associated the idea of Shapur with the Aramaic Shapir and with Hassan and Hussein. And this is the reason why he says people are called Shubayr.
Yeah, it makes sense now.
Okay, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And in Hebrew, Shapira is a very common name. Shapira means not son of the king, it means good. It's like Hassan or Jaffe from Yafeh.
Yeah.
Simcha, did I say anything useful to you, or you probably know all of these sources?
Yeah, no, it was very good. The only thing that I would, the only comment that I have just to add real quick is that when we talk about being fruitful and multiplying, I think he mentioned it, that applies to everybody, Jews and non-Jews. It's not a Jewish commandment per se, the way that I think we look at it. And also, it's from the Jewish point of view, it applies to the man. The man is obligated, not a woman. I mean, women obviously have a part in it, but they obviously they have to, the man can't multiply and be fruitful without women. But if a woman is quote unquote barren or chooses not to have children for some reason, she hasn't violated that commandment, I think is the way to look at it.
Is that true?
What?
I was thinking, I'm really in trouble because I'm out of the 60s.
No, this is a commandment on men.
This is for men. Men are obligated to. Women, obviously, women have to participate in it, but they're not obligated to. So that's why if a man has several wives and only one of them is having children, he's fulfilling his obligation. But at the same time, a man is, that's why if you look back, that's why a man cannot stay with a woman who's barren as his only wife. That's the key. Otherwise, he doesn't fulfill the commandment.
Well, poor Martin, I told him beforehand I did not want kids. So
I will comment about this just to add some background to it.
Yeah.
Maimonides, in his commentary on the Mishnah, and presumably many other people, point out that the principle that men and women are equal in positive commandments that are not time-bound. This is an example of what I believe is a non-time-bound commandment that men and women are not equal in. And also, we actually saw a source which debates whether or not be fruitful and multiply applies to all human beings or only applies to Israelites. That source said that it is a blessing for all people, but it denied that it was a commandment to all Noahites. And one thing everybody agrees on is that the rules for Noahites with be fruitful and multiply are not the same as they are for Israelites. So I don't think anybody says that it is for men only, and men have to have a son and a daughter, or at least two children. I don't know that level of discussion is. I didn't see anybody who argued be fruitful and multiply in that legalistic vein for Noahites, which is interesting. And when you look at the 7 commandments of Noah, it's not there, even though Adam received that commandment. And there it is. Any other questions that people have? Zainab, do you have any other questions? Any comments about euthanasia and abortion you want to share with us from Ibn Sina or Ibn Rushd or anybody else? If you want to talk, you have to turn on your...
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I forgot again. No, I just wanted to say that it is interesting to know what someone like Avicenna says about abortion, because he's very honest. Sometimes he says that there are some ideas in Islam that you cannot accept rationally, but you have to accept it because the Prophet has said it. He's honest. He doesn't try to just moderate everything to show that no, Islam is compatible with those issues.
Yeah, I'd like to quote something from Ibn Rushd Averroes about that, who basically says that the justification for Islam, it's very interesting. is that it's the best system as opposed to anything else. But following the prophet creates a system that is the best, which is an interesting argument. So I thought that was quite rational as opposed to traditional, despite the fact that Ibn Rushd also was a Sharia expert. I think I read something in Al-Ghazali also about 40 days or 4 months or something like that as well. Ghazali also was an ethicist and a Sufi, but also a Sharia expert. Okay, next week we have Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha is the story of Abraham. Simcha, anything you think we ought to look at?
For next week?
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot there.
The Rashi math is kind of interesting, but maybe people might not be interested in it.
The Rashi, the math?
The math and trying to figure out all the years and everything. And
yeah, well, so maybe we'll do that. My mysticism class briefly discussed Brit Ben Abitarim, and that might also be interesting. And God's call to Abraham or his calls to Abraham or the promise. I'll figure it out by next week.
yeah,
This week I spent an awful lot of time thinking about Abraham in the fiery furnace, but decided that the 7 commandments of Noah would be a better choice for this group.
yeah.
Okay, have a great week, everybody. I guess, Mimi, I'll see you tomorrow in class.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.